Evangelical Christianity has dominated the North American landscape since the middle of the 20th century. In the majority, and politically powerful, it has been a dominant influence in Christianity around the world. It is not alone, however. Catholic and Orthodox churches predate evangelicals by over a millennium. The two newcomers, the Pentecostal Church, which blossomed in the early 20th century, and the emerging church at the dawn of the 21st century, have unique voices with which to speak to the benefits of cooperation and ecumenical endeavors. While no church on earth may be the perfect church, examining these movements together within the backdrop of our own evangelical Protestantism can hopefully lead to a discussion where the strengths of each movement can benefit each other. The Catholic Church claims it has been the steward of Christianity since Jesus declared the Apostle Peter to be the rock. Persecuted for almost 300 years, the Roman Empire accepted Christianity with the Edict of Milan in 313 AD. Slowly, the institutional hierarchy began to revolve around the Bishop of Rome, also known as the Pope. The Church flourished under Roman protection and spread quickly through the vast network of the Roman Empire. Heresies and schisms threatened Catholic theology, but none so great as the Great Schism of 1054. It was here that the Orthodox Church, which was centered in the Eastern Roman Empire, separated from the West. The two churches were further divided in 1204 AD, when during the Fourth Crusade, the Western Church occupied Constantinople and subjugated the Eastern Orthodox Church to Western rule. In 1453, with the Ottoman conquest of Asia Minor, most Eastern Orthodox churches came under Muslim rule, with the exception of the Slavic Russo churches to the north. Both traditions claim their roots back to Pentecost, and both take a different history through the medieval age. Divisions within the Catholic Church, as well as the negative residue of the Crusades, brought about a reform movement spearheaded by Martin Luther as a check and balance to what seemed like papal abuses. With the split from the Protestant section of the Church, Catholicism conducted its own Reformation and began to reevaluate the efficacy of a Roman Church still influenced by an imperial culture which had given way to European nationalism. Meanwhile, the Eastern Orthodox churches were embroiled in two main issues. The first was the threat of Islam. During the 8th and 9th centuries, vast areas of the Eastern Roman Empire were conquered by the Arab Muslims, and it forced those Orthodox churches from the Middle East to become distant from the Orthodox capital in Constantinople. The second challenge was the veneration of icons. Icons, the symbolic two-dimensional portraits, were briefly outlawed in the Orthodox Church from the iconoclast movement in the 9th century. After various councils and repeals, icons continue to be an important part of Orthodox worship today. The history of the Orthodox Church remains somewhat stagnant under Muslim rule. Eventually, Constantinople and the Eastern Roman Empire was lost to the Ottoman Turks. It has never been regained. The Orthodox Church spread northward into Russia and the Slavic countries, and today there are nearly 250 million Orthodox Christians. Like the Catholic Church, they remain faithful to the culture of the Eastern Roman Empire, as Catholicism remained to the West. Beginning in the 16th century, Catholic missionaries began to evangelize in the newly discovered Americas. With European colonialism and the expansions into Asia, the Catholic Church became a global movement with nearly 1 billion adherents. The problem with globalization, however, is that there can be much cultural distance between Latin Rome and the rest of the world. In the early 1960s, the Catholic Church entered a new phase after the Second Vatican Council authorized that Masses could be held in indigenous languages and that ecumenical dialogue could take place between Protestants, Orthodox, and Catholic leaders. In the early 21st century, various leaders of both Protestant movements and Orthodox churches have been honored guests at the Vatican. The Pentecostal Church began as a kind of reformation to the Reformation. In the 19th century, Wesleyan holiness movements began to believe that the Protestant Church was not experiencing the fullness of God's grace or the depth of sanctification as outlined in the Bible. They were concerned for apathy with the Protestant Church despite the largest missionary endeavors ever in the 19th century. Their cry was heard, and on January 1st, in the year 1900, the Pentecostal movement was born when a group of Bible students in Topeka, Kansas, experienced what they called the Holy Spirit baptism. Then, in 1906, William Seymour's Azusa Street mission took the movement public with the Azusa Street Revivals outside of Los Angeles. Riding on the back of the existing Protestant network, this attempt to reform and revitalize a perceived apathy in the Protestant movement of the 19th century flourished around the world in only a few decades. At the turn of the 21st century, a new movement arose called the Emerging Church. With the postmodern disillusionment of traditional mainline churches, a new expression of church, one that incorporates the technological revolution of the 21st century, has arrived in what is being called the Emerging Church. Meeting in homes, civic centers, and coffee shops, the Emerging Church is a church movement whose history is just getting started. All Christian traditions essentially gather to worship God, learn about Christ, develop their faith, take Holy Communion, receive teaching, and continue the presence of the Holy Spirit established at Pentecost. The Catholic Church emphasis is in the gathering of the church to be the gathering of Christ's body. The Orthodox Church emphasizes the gathering of the church as the gathering of the presence of the Holy Spirit. Two different emphases, but the same goal. Catholics place a high view on gathering to experience the sacraments, particularly the Eucharist, which is the culmination of the Mass. For Catholics, to be Christian is to attend Mass and to belong to the Church. Catholic Christian identity is centered upon the unity experienced in the Mass. Songs are sung in unity, prayers are said in unity, responses are done in unity. Orthodox churches mirror nearly exactly the Catholic Church in almost the same way in its emphasis on the sacraments, especially the taking of communion. The goal of the Orthodox Church service is that by gathering together, they form collectively a union with God that uniquely happens in the gathering of the church. Their theology of church is quite straightforward. Once a person becomes a convert, they must join the church in order to continue in their sanctification under Christ and to receive glorification upon death. Glorification, or deification, is a sort of becoming like God, or God-like, but not becoming God literally. Orthodox Christians would say they come to church more to learn who God is not by reflecting on our human frailties rather than the mystery of who He is. Pentecostals and emerging churches have a similar reason for meeting, albeit with different styles. Pentecostals gather for much the same reason. Pentecostals emphasize conservative Bible preaching, calls for conversion, extended periods of singing, praying, and a close experience with the Holy Spirit. Pentecostals do, however, focus less on pulpit preaching and more on being spontaneously led by the Holy Spirit in prayer and worship. Corporate prayer may last for 30 to 45 minutes, and there is a strong belief in the communicative gifts of the Spirit, mainly speaking in tongues and prophecy. The emerging church meets to encounter God in new, fresh, creative ways with an emphasis on interpersonal relationship. There is not even a set structure of worship in the emerging church. Some meet in houses, others in coffee shops, and some in restaurants. Most are smaller groups which facilitate discussion, organic mission, incarnational relationships, individual worship, and artistic teaching. While the emerging church has come under some criticism, the aim is the same as all churches: to grow and discover Jesus in the most impacting ways for that particular community.